Nikhil Ganesh, and I'm the MC taking over the reins as MC for this session. How do you think poetry is connected to identity? How we see ourselves, who we are? Our next author, Rene Watson, number one New York Times best-selling author of books for young readers, is here to share with us some interesting insights on what parents and educators can do to foster a love for poetry. In Rene Watson's books have sold over 1 million copies. Her young adult novel, Piercing Me Together, has received a Curator Scott King Award and a Newbery Honor. Her children's picture books and novels for teens have received several awards and recognition, and international recognition, and many of her books are inspired by experiences growing up in the Pacific Northwest. Her poetry and fiction center around the experience of black girls and invite themes of home, identity, body image, and the intersections of race, class, and gender. I invite Rene Watson to the stage. Enjoy the show.
Good afternoon. It is so good to be here. I want to say to this young poet, thank you so much for the poem and the interaction, the call and response. I loved that. I really appreciate you. And it's just good to see so many young people involved in this festival. So I just want to say how amazing it is to see young people excited about literature and parents bringing their children out on the weekend to celebrate books. It's good to be with you all. I am going to not just talk about poetry, but read some poetry to you, because I feel like you have to hear poems in order to really get into the spirit of poetry. So I will read a little bit, talk a little bit, read some more, and then we will have time to be in conversation with each other if any of you have questions. So I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, on the east coast of the United States, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is in the Pacific Northwest, and I am of Jamaican descent. So this poem that I'm going to share, and if any of you were in my session earlier today or yesterday, you've heard this, is a poem about where I'm from, and it celebrates all of those places, Portland, Oregon, the East Coast, and Jamaica. And it also critiques home. A lot of my writing both celebrates and critiques home. So we are talking about things we love and also the things we want to change about home. And this is a poem that does that. This is where I'm from. I'm made up of East Coast hip hop and island tradition. I'm from Baptist hymns and secular jigs, tambourine playing, late night staying at the church house or my friend's house or their friend's house on the weekends. Where I'm from, there are corduroy hand-me-downs and family keepsakes. Family pictures on the wall, open Bible on the coffee table. I'm from that side of town, where the media only comes for blood shed, blood wasted, never for blood restored, celebrated, or regenerated. I'm from hopscotch and double dutch, from hide and go seek and Pac-Man. I'm from curry goat, rice and peas, and beef patties. From turquoise blue water, white sand, and dreadlocks. Reggae is in my blood. Grew up in the Pacific Northwest, a place where rain falls more than sun shines. I'm from Douglas firs and pine trees, where we walk under waterfalls, drive up windy roads, and escape to the beaches on the Oregon coast. Where I'm from, music takes away the blues. I'm from Bob Marley, Mahalia Jackson, Aretha Franklin, James Brown. I'm from Jackson 5 Records and New Edition tapes. Where I'm from, we rewind tapes over and over and over again so you can write down the lyrics and memorize them. Where I'm from, the whole neighborhood is your family. Ladies sit on their porches looking out for you, shooing away boys like flies, calling your mama to tell her what you did before you can get home and lie about it. Where I'm from, people ask my friend, "Is that your hair?" And she says, "Yeah, it's mine. I bought it." I'm from divorce being passed down to children like a family heirloom. From single mamas pushing strollers, praying that their babies don't have the same struggles as them. I'm from a little goes a long way. From sun's gonna shine after the rain. I'm from persevering souls and hardworking hands, from a people destined to make it to their promised land. I'm from been there, done that, can and will do it again. Now you, tell me, where you from? Thank you. So the thing about poetry for me, especially when I was a young person, was the power to put in my own words my story. I grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of love and a lot of beauty and was misunderstood because there was also poverty and there was also violence. And so sometimes we were only narrowed down to those things, and people couldn't see that there was talent and love and grace and fun and resilience and brilliance. And so in my poems, I want to celebrate the ordinary and also push back against the stereotypes and the judgments that people had about my neighborhood. And when I'm teaching in the classroom, I am trying to get young people to think about who are the everyday people in your life that you want to celebrate and honor. I mentioned my neighbors, the ladies on the porch. Sometimes we think that we have to write the big thing, right? But the big thing is your life. It's the ordinary, it's the everyday that becomes the big thing. So that poem uses the five senses to describe where you're from. You can, if you're an educator, ask young people just to brainstorm, thinking about all the places they call home, all the people who love them, all the people they love, and just brainstorm. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? And you get to celebrate your food, the music you listen to, and then write a celebratory poem to honor places that sometimes are misunderstood or overlooked. So that is an activity I do often in the classroom. I never ask my students to do something that I won't do. So if I'm asking them to be brave and share their stories, I do it first. I take the first artistic risk. And so I share my poem, we talk about it, we get to know each other, and then they write their own Where I'm From poems. This poem that I'm going to read is about my name. So I am the youngest of 5 children. I have one brother, he's the oldest, so he thinks he's our dad, and then the rest are girls. And my oldest sister is here with me, Cheryl is here. I'm so grateful for her for coming all this way to be with me. So this poem celebrates Cheryl, my other sisters, Roy, my mom, and talks about owning your name. So I don't know if it's because I'm the youngest and there were 5 children and they just ran out of middle names or what, but I have the most generic name, right? It's Rene, no middle name, Watson. And all of my siblings had these beautiful stories about how they were named or who they were named after, what inspired the naming. And mine was like, oh, we just decided to name you Rene. There was no story. So I grew up feeling very like plain and not special, that my name didn't have a story. But then I learned the meaning of my name. And Rene means to bring new life, to resurrect, to raise from the dead. And I was like, oh, I have a powerful name. Every time you say my name, you're speaking new life into the room. So this is a poem about owning your name and all the things that we hold when we come into a space. I can look out at all of you and get a sense of your style and a little bit of your personality maybe. But I don't know what memories you hold. I don't know what you're bringing into the space, family recipes, memories, who loves you, who you love back, what you're afraid of. So this poem says, yes, you know my name, but this is who I really am underneath the name Rene. Resurrection. She named me Rene. Rene, the name that means rebirth, to bring new life. Maybe she named me this because I came last, the 5th child born just before the death of her marriage. Maybe I was prophecy that she'd live again without him. Of all the hand-me-downs bestowed on me, my name is not one of them. Roy has my father's name, and Cheryl was named by my grandmother. Teresa shares her middle name, Elizabeth, with our mom, and Diane was named after Diane Cannon because our father liked the spelling, D-Y-A-N. But there is no family history, no special tale tied to my name. It is all mine. An abracadabra name, Rene. The name of new beginnings. The name for demolishing and building back up. My name is the R&B slow jam about the love who left and came back. Is the Sunday morning hallelujah. Is the protest chant. Is the second line. My name carries the strength of Grandma Roberta, who died before I got to say goodbye, before I understood that grandmothers, like flowers, always die too soon. To write my name is to spell the sorrows of my ancestors, how they were sold and traded, hung and drowned, how their tears and sweat and blood seeded a generation. To say my name is to pronounce resilience, is to have a bounce back accent on the tip of your tongue. To say my name is to hold a prayer. A second chance is to count me out, watch me rise. So I thought I would share a little bit from my book, Maya Song, which is a picture book about the poet Maya Angelou, who is internationally known and so beloved in the United States. Her story, a lot of times, we don't tell children her story because her childhood was very dark and a lot of abuse happened to her. So we often skip past all of that and just present her as this prolific poet who wrote poems, plays, and autobiography, also was an actress, also was a dancer, was a scholar, spoke over 13 languages, right? We talk about her in this space as if she arrived that way. But when she was a child, she moved around a lot between family members, and she was abused. And when that abuse happened, she stopped speaking. For 5 years, she did not utter a word. And instead, she listened. She was very afraid of the power of her voice because when she told about the abuse, that person passed away. And she thought that maybe me telling what happened is the reason why he died. So she refused to speak for 5 years. And this section of the book talks about what happened during those 5 years when she found poetry. And we'll kind of land here for a little bit so that we can talk about what words do, how we can encourage our young people to read and to write and to tell their stories, and how sometimes reading is the introduction to wanting to then tell your own story. Once you learn about someone else's story, I think it encourages you to tell your own. So again, this is about Maya Angelou, and it's her childhood, and we're picking up in the middle of the picture book after she had stopped speaking, and her family is really trying to get her to talk. When letters come together. Mama had a friend who borrowed books from the white school. Most things were better at that school. The books were new and no pages were missing. Mama used the books to teach Maya how to read. Maya practiced putting letters together, making sounds and words that painted pictures in her mind, taking her to far away places. Maya buried the words of great poets and writers deep inside, deep inside. Word seeds from Shakespeare and Paul Laurence Dunbar, word seeds from Langston Hughes and James Weldon Johnson, a whole garden of words growing, growing inside. What words do. Sometimes words get stuck in the throat. Sometimes words itch the tongue, beg to come out, rise but then get swallowed by fear, by shame. Sometimes words nest in the mind, swirl round and round, tangle themselves with emotions, with memories. Sometimes words beat fast in the heart, putter, putter, tap, tap, knock, they beg to be spoken, to be heard. Sometimes words are patient, like tiny seeds. They wait underneath soil. They are in no hurry, no rush. When it is time, they will bloom. So I want to pause here and talk about giving young people the space to create and the patience to let them think. Especially, I want to speak to the educators in the room. When I was teaching, a class is only so many minutes and you have your lesson plan and there's a goal. They need to finish this assignment. And that is not always conducive to creativity. And so I never sit down and say, I'm going to write a novel today and then start writing it. I never sit down and say, I'm going to write a poem and finish that whole poem in one sitting. And yet we sometimes ask our young people to do that very thing, write this assignment, make the art, do the thing right now. And so I want to think about how do we ask young people to brainstorm, to listen to the world, to just play with language, to make lists before they begin to actually create. How do you take in all the words before you say anything? And so I appreciate the person who's helping Maya in this moment, just giving her book after book. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to write anything, just take in someone else's story. Just take in the world. And there will come a time, because those word seeds are being planted, right? We talked a little bit about that yesterday on a panel, that you plant things and sometimes you see the harvest and sometimes you don't. But I believe that if I give you a book and you read it and you pass that book on to someone else, all those word seeds are doing something out into the world. And that is what's happening to Maya when she's 8, 9, 10 years old. And then she becomes one of the most prolific writers that we have in the United States. So in this moment, her neighbor is challenging her now, right? There's that phase where, okay, I'm gonna let you just read or think. You don't have to say a lot. I'm gonna ask you how your day was. You're gonna say fine, and I'm not gonna push you to say more. But then comes a time to push them to actually speak and talk out loud. Poetry is meant to be spoken. Miss Flowers, a family friend, had Maya over for tea, cookies, and lemonade. You gonna talk to me today? She asked. Maya didn't say a word. Well, if you won't talk, let's see what the poets have to say. Miss Flowers read poetry out loud to Maya. Every time they read poetry together, Miss Flowers noticed Maya smile, the light in her eyes. Maya, sweetheart, you seem to really love poetry, but you can't really love poetry unless you say it out loud. Miss Flowers told Maya, you can't really love poetry till you speak it, till you let the words in you out. Rebirth. Maya took a poetry book and ran under the house where the chickens rested. She sat on top of the soft dirt, opened the book, opened her mouth, and words came out. First in a whisper, then in a shout, they leaped and danced and bloomed out of her, saying, listen, listen, we have something to tell you. How to build a world. Words poured out of Maya and she felt revived. A whole world of words had been growing inside. She believed people became what they said, so she chose her words carefully, planted powerful affirmations in her world. Words like forgive, like kind. Words like brave, like powerful, like phenomenal. Words like faith, like dream, like hope, like free. So, like I said, Maya becomes the poet. She was the first woman and the first Black person to give our inaugural poem for President Bill Clinton, which was such a big deal. And so all of our young people know her poems, recite her poems. I grew up reading her poetry and reading about her life. I think sometimes the most encouraging thing is not her work. Her body of work is amazing, but it's who she is and who she was and what she went through that then allowed her to create the work that she gave to the world, knowing that she had endured so much. And so when I'm writing and talking and teaching young people, I am asking them to not be afraid to go to the hard stuff. Young people do not have a lot of power, right? And so they're not making decisions. There's rules at school, there's rules at home, but on the page, they get to create and break the rules, right? Poetry is all about messing with language, playing around, letting your imagination grow and be big on the page. And so I'm always encouraging young people, if you have something to say, you can say it in a poem, you can say it in art making. And I think that that is a way to heal and to find comfort and strength. Life can be messy and shattered, and sometimes this world can feel like it's breaking you into pieces. And I think art can piece you back together and make you whole. So when I'm thinking of having young people write poetry, it is a way to share where they're from, but it's also a way to get them to heal and to look out at the world and say, this is who I am, these are my dreams, this is who I want to be, and I get to show off my skills of writing that maybe I can't do when I'm so formally having to write an essay. So I want you all to think about how do we ask young people to create beauty out of chaos and how that can be therapeutic. When a child feels like their sense of control is lost, a pandemic, death, loss, family crisis, and they have no control. How can art help them gain some stability and anchor them? So some ways that we can do that is by creating found poems. Uh, Cutting up a newspaper or cutting up a magazine with and just putting all these words out on the table and asking a young person to take words and then create, right? So at this point, they don't even have to write anything of their own. They are creating something with someone else's words. The act of doing that, the act of taking chaos on a table and making something out of that is cathartic. It brings some kind of like, okay, there can be something beautiful that comes out of a messy situation. You can also do something like that with collage and art, like taking things, putting it together. It makes beautiful art, but what is happening spiritually and emotionally for a young person is that it's giving them, it's building the muscle of perseverance. It's building the muscle of, I might not have everything that I want right now, or things might look a mess, but there can be another way to look at this situation. So I'm always asking, as young people are creating and reading and taking in the world and responding to the world through their art, I'm asking them to think about who they are in this world and what lessons are they learning about life, not just about this is a metaphor and this is a definition and this is how you write a poem. That is important, right? We want to teach craft. I think when we think about a well-rounded student understands craft, but also is emotionally intelligent and can understand how to craft their life, how to put together the pieces of them that are broken, and how to communicate and talk and share. And so I think poetry is a way to do that. The stakes can get lower when it's someone else's words first that they're using, and then we push and ask them to make their own work. And usually for the young person who might feel anxious and the blank page scares them and they just don't know what to write, don't know what to say, I often have them work with poetry that is structured, like writing a haiku or an ode, a poem that has a formula already, that you only have to do this many syllables, this many lines. It just helps them like, okay, this is what I have to do. Students who maybe are too structured and too rigid and are so hard on themselves and they want to be perfect, they want to do it right. They're the student that's always asking, am I finished? Am I finished? Is this right? Will you read this? Is it? That student might need to do free verse poetry where there really are no rules and you can break them because you want to push them to maybe go easy on yourself and not put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect and follow all of the rules. So when I'm giving class assignments, I'm often thinking about what do my students need emotionally and how can my lesson plan help them on both levels. I'm teaching them how to write. I'm making sure I'm giving them strong literature, right? And I'm also thinking about what's happening in the world. And that is a lot to ask of educators to juggle all of those things at once. But I think if we can always be thinking of what do they need academically, what do they need emotionally, socially, and how can I bridge all of that in one lesson, I think that they benefit from that, and so do I as the educator in the room. I am going to also talk a little bit about playfulness. I write serious books mostly, and every book has moments of joy and young people who just get to dance and laugh or race and play outside and all of that. But usually, I mean, they're serious topics that I'm covering. And I think that it's also important to let language just do what language does, which means it makes us laugh sometimes. It brings back good memories. And so sometimes I'm asking young people to just play with language, just see what happens. Rewrite this line several times and let's see what else it can say. How can you take a song lyric and then turn that into a poem? Mixing and matching scripture, songs, your words all together to create something. Experimenting, I think, is important in the classroom as well. We're talking about identities, and I also want to say that I think writing in general, and poetry especially, can help young people claim their identity or reclaim their identity. And in my book, Some Places More Than Others, Amara is discovering her past and where she comes from, and she's learning about all the things that she brings with her into a space Her teacher has assigned this assignment called the Suitcase Project. And he has asked the young people to go out and interview the elders in their life and to bring back artifacts that are important to them and to make a suitcase, a physical thing that represents the interviews that they did and photos, poems, lines of songs that are important to their family, recipes. So she's working on this project and she realizes, oh, it's not really about the physical suitcase, it's about the other suitcase, my heart. What does my heart carry and what do I bring into the space? So as I mentioned before, I can look out at you and I see us all here and I see what we've brought into the space physically, but I don't really know you until you start sharing your story, right? I don't know what you carry with you. So this poem is about a character named Amara who carries these things with her, and she, at the end of the book, shares this poem with her class. My suitcase carries Grandma's recipes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Ginger for tea, brown sugar for oatmeal, a deep pot for stews and soups, an iron skillet for everything else. Instructions for stretching a little into a whole lot. Grandpa's southern drawl, his slow walk and brown fedora, a handful of caramel candies and always peppermint, coffee beans, and cocoa powder. Old records with jazz moans scratched in the vinyl. Mom's bundles of lavender for drawers and closets, coconut oil for hair, for skin. Candles to chase away darkness. How she makes beauty out of everything she touches. Her knowing even when no one has told her. Dad's verbs and nouns, his tapes and notebooks, a record of his soul. His voice always comforting me, telling me I am loved as is. Gray skies and Oregon rain, the beep, beep, beep of New York streets, rivers and roots, protests and prayers, all these things I bring with me. So I want to encourage young people to bring their full selves into the classroom or into the space that they're in when they're with me. When I was a child, sometimes a teacher who was they were frustrated, we were probably acting up, and they would say something like, leave your personal life at the door. This is math class, or this is science, or we're here to learn. And I would be so upset whenever they would say that, because how can I leave my life at the door and come in and learn? What does that even mean? What are you asking me to do? I am a whole person, and I want to be seen holistically. And I didn't know how to articulate that as a young person, but the older I get and the more that I work with young people, I'm constantly thinking of ways to ask them to bring yourself into this space. I want to know what you're afraid of. I want to know your dreams. I want to know what happened today at school. I want you to talk to me. And if you can't talk to me, then let's write about it. Let's just read a book together and talk about these characters. All of that helps to build relationship and a trust with a young person when you're wanting to connect with them. And I think the more we ask, the more they're willing to share if we're consistent in the asking. I also think that poetry can and should reclaim, like we were saying, identity and put on record who you are and what you're proud of about yourself. So there are things that we kind of commonly can say, I'm proud of that. As a culture, we're proud of this. And then there are some things that maybe are not so special. There are the things that sometimes you feel, maybe I wish I could change this about my hair. I wish I could change this about the way that I talk or the way my body is shaped. And so I ask young people, what are some things that you maybe have been teased for, or you're embarrassed about, or you're not proud of? And let's also write about those things too. And how can we find a way to celebrate all of who we are, all the parts of us, and honor those things that people sometimes disregard and are not grateful for. So this is a poem about the body and owning my body. And in this particular poem, the character's body, this is a poem from Watch Us Rise, a young adult novel that talks about this girl. Her name is Jasmine, and she's constantly having to say, please don't just judge me by the color of my skin, the texture of my hair, the size of my body. I am so much more than all of those things, and this is who I really am, and this is the body that I want to celebrate. This poem is called This Body. My body is perfect and imperfect and black and girl and big and thick hair and short legs and scraped knee and beating heart and hands that hold and voice that bellows and feet that dance and arms that embrace and my mama's eyes and my daddy's smile and my grandma's hope. And my body is masterpiece and my body is mine. So these are prompts. Oh, thank you. These are all prompts that we can all give our young people. If you're a teacher, a parent, write a poem about your body. Celebrate what people tease about you. They say your ears are big, write a poem about those big ears. They say you're too dark-skinned, write a poem celebrating your brownness, right? So you can take poetry and make it a way to protest, to speak against the thing that is speaking against you, and be in conversation with the world and speaking back to it and saying, no, no, no. I know that's your standard of beauty, but this is my standard of beauty. So I'm always trying to help young people look to song lyrics, look to other poems, to then be inspired to write their own and to think about what can I say that is the counter narrative to what is already being said about people like me and the beliefs that they may have. So that is one prompt, and I want to make sure you all got that. The prompt of my suitcase carries, and then you ask them, all the things that their suitcase carries, all the things they love, the people they love, and what they bring with them when they walk into a space. I'm going to read one last thing before we open up for questions, and I'll share a little bit more of some ideas around how do we get young people to want to write, to want to read. We've talked a lot this weekend about being readers ourselves as the adult in the space, making sure we're modeling that. And one thing I appreciate about my mother was that when I was a child, I would often, at night, I would maybe get up to get a little drink of water, and I would see the light on in her room and hear this low voice. I would look, and she would be reading her Bible out loud. No one's in the room, but she's reading it out loud. And she would have a highlighter and a notebook beside her, and she was highlighting the scripture and writing down words that meant something to her, moments that were important to her. So she taught me how to read. And I don't mean she taught me how to sound out words and read, but she taught me that reading is an intimate thing, that I could read it out loud, that books didn't have to be so precious, that they couldn't be marked up, that I could actually engage with the text, take parts out, write them down, and then sometimes in her bedroom near her desk, she would have on little regular, nothing fancy index cards in her handwriting, scriptures, song lyrics, words from poems all around her space. So I grew up in a household where there were affirmations, words of encouragement, morals and values of how to live in this world that is complicated and hard, right? And so I was always having words around me. And I think that in part is why I became a writer and how I became to love words and language and learned how to use them. So I want you to all think about what is hanging in my home, or how do my young people interact with language besides just texting or writing, sometimes, or reading a whole book? How can we take a little piece of something and make that the thing that we focus on? Quotes from poems. A friend of mine has a jar in her dining room that has quotes, scriptures, song lyrics, affirmations, and each day, someone in the family picks one out, reads it out loud before everyone leaves the house, and they just kind of meditate on it for a little bit. And then that's it. They've engaged with some words as a family, and they're now going to hold each other accountable. Did that quote come up for you today? Did you need those words today? What does this mean to you? How are you living this out? Are you challenged by these words? And then conversation and growth can begin from there. So those are some ideas of how to get young people thinking about words, engaging with words, and writing their own, hopefully, one day. and not to become a writer, right? So there is the child that you already know, oh, this is a poet. This child loves to write, they love to read, they're probably going to be a teacher. We can kind of sometimes see the talents, the gifts that our young people are already showcasing, and that is great. And please do encourage them to pursue the arts. You can make a living as an artist. But also, I think that writing and poetry helps you be a deep thinker. It helps you become a critical thinker of your world, right? You're reading the world when you have to unpack what this metaphor means, when you have to look deeply at something, you get into the practice of not jumping to conclusions. Maybe there's more. If I read something and I have to reread it to get to the meaning, maybe when I meet you and maybe you rub me the wrong way, I don't give up on you right away. I reread you and I try to work on this relationship. Maybe when I feel like quitting because something is hard, I go back and think about all the times I had to revise something. And I learned like, oh, revision is the real work. The first draft is not really where it's at. It's the reworking and reworking. So I can rework on friendships. I can rework on love. I can forgive. I can come back. That's where you learn, right? How to be a citizen of the world. So we're teaching craft, but we're also teaching how to be, how to exist. And we're pushing our young people to be their best selves. I'm going to close with this last poem from Love is a Revolution. It's actually song lyrics that the character is listening to, who is thinking about, even if nobody loves me, I love myself. And that the true revolution might be self-love. Because there are so many reasons why the world tells you you are not worthy of love. So it's radical to say, just as I am enough. And even with my flaws, I am enough. And I have failed, but I am not a failure. And love is patient, and love is kind, and love is not just for me to give away. Keep some for myself. Not waiting on someone to want me, need me, no fairy tale dreams of what my life might be. I love me right now. Right now, I love me. Today, I am possible. And all that is coming is already mine. Today, I am my own revolution. Thank you so much. We're going to open it up for questions if you have any, and be in dialogue for a little bit.
Do you think poetry is in decline or is it growing?
I think it's growing, and in the United States especially. More and more, there are novels in verse, right? So there's whole novels where each chapter is a poem. So you could pull it out as a standalone poem, or within the novel, it fits to tell a larger story. Spoken word poetry is a big thing where young people write the poem, which is the first brave thing, but then they get on stage and actually compete against other poets. It's become a sport where they are competing locally, then regionally, then nationally. So yes, I think, especially with everything that's happened in our world in recent years, poetry has become the thing that teachers are kind of turning to help young people make sense of it all. So I think it's on the rise, especially contemporary poetry.
And in the curriculum?
Yes, in the curriculum. I think it has a long way to go. It's right now kind of a special unit, but I wish that poetry was just in the everyday, right? So what would happen if a teacher just opened the class reading a poem? And we don't have to write a poem or talk about it deeply, but we're just going to open with poetry and then move on to the lesson. What if poetry was presented in a math class, not just an English or literature class, right? What if poems were on the walls in schools? So I would like to see poetry just be a little more embedded in everything, not so much as a lesson to teach, but just as a way to encourage and speak to young people.
Rene, you spoke about working with young people and getting them to express themselves in poetry. My sense of poetry is that it's a little exposing. I feel, a little naked in the room. And when you're working with kids on this type of project, how do you manage that space because they are exposed to their peers from whom they feel also judged? and then it goes out. So just how do you?
Yes, that's a great question. So, like I mentioned, that I take the first risk, right? I'm always trying to model what I want my students to do. So I read the poem first. If I'm assigning something, I try to do the assignment and think about, oh yeah, this part is going to be hard. So maybe this is not a day 3 assignment. Maybe I need to wait later in the school year before we've really built community to go to some of those tougher subjects. But the celebration poems and the poems about just honoring, those are a little safer to begin with. But even still, it's hard to go there and to ask them to read out loud. So what I say to my young people, my expectation is that you write and you share. That is what we do in this class. You get to choose what you share. So some students, they want to read their whole poem. They want to stand up and they go for it. And then other students are like, I will read one line and I'm going to read it very quietly and pass it to the next person. And that's okay, wherever they're at, but every voice needs to be heard. So sometimes challenging them in that way, they at least start to practice getting their words into the room. If I feel like my students can't even do that, if we sit in a circle and I know there will be some that just can't even do a line, I'll ask them to do a pair share first. I'll ask, okay, you don't have to share what you wrote, but can you tell us what you wrote about? Because I'm really not as interested as, it's not so much about them sharing the poem, it's about them engaging with the community. So as a teacher, I have to work on what is my actual goal for this lesson. They wrote the poem, we'll talk about that, they'll revise it. For participation's sake, I want them to feel a part of this community. I want them to practice what it is like to engage with each other. And so that goal overrides my desire to hear them say a stanza of poetry. And so as long as their voice is in the room, I'm okay with that.
Hi.
Hi.
So before I ask my question, I really just want to tell you how beautiful your poems are and how I could relate to the message you're trying to convey.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I am myself an avid reader. I've been reading since I was 4, and I'm pretty above average in poetry and writing. But there are a lot of people like me who are not suitable to go for a career in this sort of thing, but poetry is something that really is very important to me. And as you said, young people, because they're within the confines of school and home, there's not much place to break out of the rules. You're always in some sort of confinement. So I find poetry as a means to break out of that and just feel independent and free. So as a student, how do you suggest to inculcate, poetry in my daily life? I can't write every day, but how can you suggest I do that?
Yes, I love that question. I think it's a little bit of, it's a lot of things. I think you could read something every day, right? Poems can be compact, so you can actually read a whole poem and feel accomplished that you did that. So maybe starting your day off with a poem. I do write in my journal daily. Sometimes I set my timer for 2 minutes. Everybody has 2 minutes to give to something, right? So as busy as I am, as much as I travel, as much as I'm writing what's on deadline and under contract that I have to write, I try to make time to just write for me. This isn't to share, this isn't to show off any writing skills, it's just me and my journal and my thoughts. So I would challenge you to think about just writing daily, and it doesn't have to be like I'm going to sit down and write for a whole hour, because you're a student, you have homework, you have obligations, you might not be able to do that, but I think you have 2 minutes, and I promise you, and this is for everyone in the room, if you set your timer for 2 minutes and you start writing, when that timer goes off, you're going to be, oh man, and you're going to want to go some more, right? So I would challenge you to do that. And I want to encourage you to think about yourself as a writer right now. You might not be a published writer, but it sounds like you're writing. So if you, young people in the room, are you're writing, you're creating dances, you're writing songs, you're making art, you have a sketchbook and you're always doodling in that sketchbook, you are an artist. You are a writer. Yes, you might not have a book that's published. Yes, you might not have your art in a museum, but you can own that word. I am a writer. I am an artist. You might not do that for a career, and that's okay. But you can still be a creative person in your life. It doesn't have to be the thing you want to do forever, but it is the thing you're doing right now, so you can own that title.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Hello. I'm
I
over
hear the
here.
voice.
Here I am. Here I am.
Hi.
I honestly wish you had been my teacher. If you could time travel back, I'd really appreciate it. I'm sure I'd be so much smarter.
Oh.
so, so my question, I have two questions. The first is, when you're approaching poems, do you first read for feeling or meaning? And how do you find that impacts, how much people love poetry or, encouraging children to get into poetry? That's the first question.
Thank you for pausing and not giving. Hold on, I'm gonna answer that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So I think first I'm writing emotionally. I'm actually not really being a writer in my first drafts. I am just kind of getting out what's in me, and I'm just letting myself write. I have drafts of poems and novels where I'm writing, it's flowing, and then I'm stuck, and I'm like, something needs to happen here. And I will literally type that into the manuscript. Something needs to happen here in parentheses. And then I just keep going because I know that a first draft is messy and it's all my emotions just out on the page, right? And then I put my writer hat on in the second draft and I think about craft and I think about meaning and I think about how can I say this better? This is a cliche. Everyone says it this way. What can I do that's a little, and I start crafting the poem after I kind of have the emotion or the theme out on the page. And so for me, I think I write from an emotional place first and not so much the meaning. And sometimes I don't even know what the meaning is until after I've actually worked on it. And then the meaning emerges and I'm like, oh, this is what this is about, or this is what I've been grappling with. And sometimes it's speaking to me as I am crafting it, if that makes any sense. And
Thank
part
you.
two. Yes.
No, that's really interesting. So my second question is just to say, as a writer, are there some recurring themes that keep coming back to you and revisiting you?
Yes, for sure. If you know my work at all, you know that family is important. Friendship is always a theme in my work, and especially friendship between women and girls. Mentorship, mothering comes up a lot. And then the race, the intersections of our lives, right? We can be siloed and only think of ourselves as this one identity. But I like to think about, well, what does it mean to be a woman in this world? What does it mean to be a black woman? What does it mean to be a black woman who is big? What does it mean to be a black woman who is big with natural hair? What does it mean? And I'm just going to keep thinking of all the identities and try to figure out what I want to say about that in a piece. So yes, those themes come up often because I have a lot of thoughts about them. So I'm writing about them in many books and in many poems. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, thank you. There's a hand back over there too for after this one.
So I just wanted to ask that what is one topic that you find like very meaningful to you that you really like to write about? And so there are a lot of topics that you write about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So which is one topic which you find like really meaningful to you?
What is one topic that is really meaningful to me is my childhood. I write a lot about the neighborhood that I grew up in. That poem that I opened up with is a real place, and those are real people that I have very tender memories of. And though that poem is real, even in my fiction, those kind of personalities, those memories come up again. So you'll always have in my book a wise woman who is mothering somebody that's not even her child. You'll always have best friends they have each other's back and they're always there for each other even through the hard stuff. So relationships, my child, all of that is in my work because my childhood was very dear and important to me, partly because it was so misunderstood. Where I grew up, people would often say, nothing good comes out of Northeast Portland. And they were talking about my home. They were saying that the kids who lived in that neighborhood were never going to be anything. So now, as a writer, I want to make sure that I am honoring the people who lived in that place of nothingness and saying, no, something was there. People were there, and we were loved, and we loved. There's someone over here? Yes.
Okay.
What is livelihood without poetry?
Can you say it one more time?
What is livelihood without poetry?
What is livelihood without poetry? Well, in my life, I feel like my life would be boring without poetry. Poetry is where I get to play and have fun and be sassy and talk back and say things that I'm not bold enough to say person to person. I can put on something in my writing that maybe in an actual meeting or in an actual interaction with someone, I might be too shy to say. There's so many. Have you ever been in a situation where in the moment you have all these feelings and then you walk away and you're like, I wish I would have said that. Oh man, I should have raised. Poetry and write lets me say it. It lets me go back and do, you know what? This is how I feel about what just happened. And in the moment, I couldn't access my words or my true feelings. So without storytelling, without poetry, I think my life would be very dull. And I don't think I would be as brave and as bold as I actually am. I have grown into this boldness. It wasn't always a part of me. And that's because of poetry. I just want to, I know there's someone over here that has their hand up. I want to make sure we get them too. Okay.
Hi. So first of all, poetry that you read out, and I've read your poetry before as well, just incredible, engaging, and I feel like your poetry engages with vulnerability almost as if it's its own language. So I just wanted to ask you, you deal with a lot of challenging themes in your books as well. And how is the process of translating so much vulnerability to the language of young people for you?
I think I can write for and to young people because I am listening to all of you. I have young people in my life. So I'm not kind of coming to my writing as an adult with a lesson to teach you, or I want you to think like me. I want you to think. I want you to care. But you might differ from what I'm thinking about something, right? I just want you all to have conversations. So I feel like my job as a writer, especially a writer for young readers, is to listen to what you all are saying. So I have nieces, nephews, my students when I'm teaching, kind of collecting what you all are complaining about sometimes, what you're loving, what your questions are, and I want to be in conversation with you about that. So I think I can tap into that because I'm actually tapped into you as people, and I hope that I always have that relationship. I never want to write about a people who I don't care about and who I'm not connected to. So that question of can you write outside of your identity? I'm a adult and I write for children, so I'm not a child, but I'm writing in the voice of a child. And in the same way that we talk about can you write outside of your race or anything else, any other identity, I think yes, if you love the people you're writing about and you're actually in conversation with them. So as long as y'all keep talking to me, I'm going to keep talking to you through my books, for sure.
Hi, can I
Hi.
ask you the question?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a high school teacher, and as a part of the curriculum, I do teach poetry. So thank you for all the strategies that you shared with us today. My question is, I really struggle grading poetry. Yeah.
Yes.
So, there are those that you get which really scream soul and spirit, but they don't have too much artistry, and there are others which have pretty plebeian premises and ideas, but they're brilliantly crafted. So, how do you go about grading poetry?
Yeah.
And the bigger question is, do you grade poetry at all? Because it's like a personal thing that you're sharing with the world.
I truly appreciate that question. I want to clarify. So my teaching has been as a teaching artist, which means I am a writer in residence that would go into the schools and partner with the classroom teachers. So thank God I did not have to do grading. I was the fun auntie that got to come in and do the activities with young people and didn't have to so much worry about grades. But I will say this, I did have a rubric, right? And I would let young people know these are the expectations of this poem. We've learned metaphor, personification, simile. I want to see that in your work. So we craft, check. I want to see vulnerability. Where are you taking risk? So whatever the thing I've been teaching, sensory detail, all of that, they can look at the rubric and say, oh, do I have the five senses somewhere in my poem. And if you don't, then you know you're not passing this assignment because you don't have the things that are on the checklist. And oftentimes, the class has made that rubric with me. So I say to them, what makes a strong poem? And they tell me, and as they're telling me, I'm writing it on the board. So as a class, we've agreed that a strong poem is this, and that. Okay, so when you write your final pieces, make sure your poem is a strong, so that they know we are going to assess these, right? And they have a guideline of how they're being assessed. I do think that it is true. You can't grade a poem as far as like, is this student going to the depths of their soul and taking emotional risk, right? So that is not something I would be looking at as an educator. I'm not grading you on that. I am asking, did you finish it? Did you include the things that we've talked about? And maybe did you share it, if that is important to me for that unit? So that is how I would think about grading. And I would talk about that with my young people too, and say, we're not gonna have traditional grades for this assignment, but I am looking at, and then tell them the things that you're looking at. I hope that helps. I think maybe we have time for one more question, and if not, we will dismiss. All right, so I did this yesterday. Can I do this last little thing? It's a call and response. And now adults, the young people showed out yesterday, so y'all have to be louder than them, all right? So we've talked a lot about the voice and writing and how we can change the world with our voices. I want you to repeat after me and think about changing the world in big and in small ways with your own voice. Not the big world, but your world. How can you bring change in your classroom, your community, your family? Repeat after me how I say it. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. All right, go change the world. Go change the world. Go change the world. Thank you for having me.